The industrial scent of bleach and lavender clung to Alara's uniform, a second skin she could never quite peel off. It was the smell of invisibility. After 10 hours of scrubbing away the sins of the wealthy and the powerful, her own identity felt just as scoured, leaving only a dull ache in her lower back and a phantom weariness behind her eyes. The Sterling Grand was a monument to excess, a gilded cage where supernatural elites played at being civilized, and humans like her were the silent, tireless gears that kept the illusion spinning. Tonight's final task was the Royal Azura Suite, a sprawling penthouse that cost more per night than she earned in a year. It was meant to be vacant, prepped for the Vampire King's arrival tomorrow. Yet, the air inside was wrong. It wasn't the sterile emptiness of a cleaned room. It was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the electric hum of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pricked at the base of her skull. She'd learned long ago that for people like her, curiosity was a luxury that often came with a fatal price. Her job was to clean, reset, and disappear. Nothing more. She pushed her cart into the marble foyer, the squeak of its wheels obscenely loud in the oppressive silence. She collected the single-used glass from the wet bar, noting the faint, dark residue at the bottom. Not wine. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings. She moved through the living area, her gaze sweeping over the plush, undisturbed furniture, the dark silk curtains drawn tight against the glittering city lights. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. It was the closet in the master bedroom that drew her in. The heavy, dark wood door was ajar by a mere fraction of an inch, a sliver of deeper darkness in the dimly lit room. Protocol demanded she check every space. Her hand trembled as she reached for the ornate brass handle. A low sound, barely audible, seeped from the crack, a ragged, pained breath. Every instinct screamed at her to back away, to leave the cart, clock out, and never look back. But a deeper, more stubborn part of her, the part that had survived things far worse than a strange noise in a dark room, refused to yield to the fear. She pulled the door open. The interior was cavernous, lined with empty cedar shelves and brass rods. And huddled on the floor in the far corner, half shrouded in the shadow of a hanging garment bag, was a man. He was folded into himself, his bespoke suit torn and stained with something dark and wet. His head was bowed, a curtain of raven black hair hiding his face, but she could see the unnatural angle of his arm, the deep, ugly gashes that marred the expensive fabric of his jacket. A tremor racked his powerful frame. Then he lifted his head, and Alara's breath hitched in her throat. It was Prince Kalen, heir to the vampire throne. His face, usually a mask of arrogant perfection on news feeds and society pages, was a ruin of bruises and cuts. A deep gash split his lower lip, and one of his silver eyes was swollen nearly shut. But it was the other eye, the one that met hers, that truly stole her voice. It was filled with a desperate, hunted agony that mirrored a terror she knew intimately. He was broken. And he was hiding. The prince of the night, the predator at the apex of the food chain, was hiding in a closet like a frightened child. And she, a human maid with nothing to her name but a haunted past, had just found him. Terror was a physical thing, a block of ice forming in her stomach. Her first coherent thought was to run. Scream. Alert security. Handing over a wounded royal was surely the correct, the safe, protocol. He was their problem, not hers. She took a half step back, her heels scuffing against the plush carpet. The sound was a thunderclap in the silent room. His head snapped up, that one good silver eye locking onto her with frightening intensity. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and up Alara's spine, a primal warning from a cornered predator. She froze, her body rigid, her mind screaming. This was how it ended. Found in the wrong place at the wrong time, a witness to something she was never meant to see. She would be collateral damage, a loose end snipped and discarded without a second thought. But then the growl hitched, turning into a choked gasp of pain as he tried to shift his weight. The mask of fury crumbled, revealing the raw agony beneath. "Wait," he rasped, his voice a shredded whisper. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and desperate. It was the last thing she'd expected. She had anticipated a threat, a demand, the cold, sharp finality of a predator silencing its prey. But not this. Not this raw, stripped-bare vulnerability. It disarmed her, short-circuiting the frantic flight response that had kept her alive for so long. She saw not the prince, but the man. The blood, the bruises, the ragged breathing. She saw the same hunted look she'd seen in her own reflection years ago, in a cracked mirror, in a shelter she'd fled to in the dead of night. That recognition was a hook in her soul, deeper and stronger than her fear. "Please," he added, the word costing him dearly. His gaze held hers, and in their depths, she saw not a monster, but a desperate being fighting for his life. "They'll kill me. If they find me, they'll finish it." The word was laced with a betrayal so profound it made Alara's own scars ache in sympathy. He wasn't hiding from enemies of the crown, he was hiding from his own people. The choice crystallized in that moment, sharp and terrifyingly clear. She could walk away, pretend she saw nothing, and live with the ghost of his desperate face for the rest of her short, invisible life. Or she could step forward, into a world of danger she couldn't possibly comprehend, and offer a hand to someone who had fallen. It was madness. It was suicide. It was the only thing she could do. Slowly, deliberately, she let her cleaning cart roll silently back until it blocked the bedroom door. A flimsy barricade, but a decision made manifest. She took a deep breath, the sterile lavender scent of her uniform filling her lungs, and walked back toward the closet. She knelt, keeping a careful distance, her movements slow and non-threatening, the way one might approach a wounded wolf. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. He watched her, his silver eye narrowed with a suspicion that warred with his desperation. "My royal guard," the words were bitter, coated in poison. "A coup. Led by my uncle." Alara's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an assault, it was treason. A battle for the throne being fought in the shadows of a luxury hotel. And she was now standing in the middle of it. She grabbed the small, state-of-the-art first aid kit from her cart, its contents woefully inadequate for this level of injury, but it was something. It was an action. An action was better than freezing. As she drew closer, a strange scent began to cut through the smell of blood and ozone. It was dark and wild, like a forest after a storm, a mix of rain-soaked earth, pine, and something uniquely, intoxicatingly masculine. It tugged at something deep inside her, a dormant, unfamiliar sense. "Let me see your arm," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He hesitated, a flicker of pride warring with his pain. Then, with a pained grunt, he extended his injured arm. The fabric of his suit was fused to a brutal wound on his forearm, a deep gash that looked like it had been carved by serrated silver. Her stomach churned, but she forced herself to remain calm. "This will hurt," she warned, her fingers gently touching the sleeve near the wound. The moment her skin made contact with the fine wool of his suit, a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. It wasn't static. It was a living current of energy, a flash of heat that made her gasp. His head jerked up, his silver eye wide with shock. He stared at her, not at her face, but through her, as if seeing something she couldn't. The air between them crackled, thickening with an unseen force. It was a dizzying, terrifying sensation, like standing on the edge of a cliff and feeling the wind pull you forward. For him, the pain receded into a dull throb, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming flood of sensation. Her scent, not the chemical lavender of her uniform, but the scent beneath it, of warm bread, wild honey, and quiet strength, crashed over him. It was the scent he had unknowingly searched for his entire existence, the scent of his mate. His soul, weary and battered, recognized hers instantly. A fierce, primal wave of protectiveness surged through him, so potent it nearly brought him to his knees. This human, this fragile, brave creature, was his. And he had just dragged her into his own personal hell. For Alara, the shock was followed by a bewildering, impossible feeling of safety. Kneeling before a wounded vampire prince who could snap her neck with a flick of his wrist, she felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming home. The ambient fear that was her constant companion quieted for the first time in years. The world narrowed to the space between them, the charged air, the intoxicating scent of him, and the shocking revelation in his gaze. What was that?" she whispered, pulling her hand back as if burned. Kaelan stared at her, his expression a mixture of awe, disbelief, and horror. "I don't know," he lied, his voice rough. He couldn't tell her. He couldn't burden her with the truth of what she was to him, not now, not when it would paint an even bigger target on her back. He had to protect her, even from himself. He gritted his teeth, as she began to carefully cut away the fabric from his arm. The sting of the antiseptic she applied was nothing compared to the searing brand of her touch. Each gentle dab of the gauze against his skin was both torture and ecstasy. He, who had commanded armies and brought kingdoms to heel, was now completely at the mercy of a soft-handed human maid. And strangely, the surrender felt less like defeat and more like salvation. She worked in silence, her focus absolute. He watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the steady, competent movements of her hands. She wasn't disgusted by his wounds or terrified of his nature. She was simply helping. This quiet act of compassion was more profound than any declaration of loyalty he had ever received. "They think I fled the city," he finally said, his voice low. "They'll be searching the borders, the airports. No one will think to look for me here, right under their noses." "Not yet. But the king arrives tomorrow," Alara stated, her voice tight. "The entire floor will be swarming with his security. You can't stay here." He knew she was right. But the thought of leaving her, of severing this fragile, inexplicable connection, was a physical pain. He needed her. More than blood, more than safety, he needed the quiet strength that radiated from her. "Help me," he said, the words raw and unadorned. "Just for a little while. Help me stay hidden. I can reward you. Name your price." Alara paused, her hands stilling. She lifted her gaze to his, and her clear, honest eyes held no trace of greed. There was a deep sadness in them, a hint of old wounds. "Some things don't have a price," she said softly. "And no one should have to beg for help when they are bleeding on the floor." She finished wrapping his arm with a clean bandage, her touch gentle but firm. "Drink this." She pushed the glass of water she'd brought towards him. "We need to get you out of this closet." The hours that followed bled into a surreal, clandestine dance. Alara, the invisible maid, became a shadow operative in her own workplace. She knew the hotel's secrets, the service elevators that didn't show up on schematics, the forgotten storage rooms on sublevels, the blind spots in the security camera coverage. She was the ghost in the machine, and for the first time, she used her invisibility as a weapon. She smuggled Kaelan from the royal suite to a small, out-of-commission utility room on the same floor, a dusty space filled with discarded furniture and forgotten supplies. It was cramped and windowless, a far cry from his palace, but it was safe. It was anonymous. Her biggest challenge was sustenance. He was weak, his healing abilities hampered by the silver in his wounds and a profound lack of blood. He watched her with a feverish intensity, his fangs aching, his instincts screaming at him to take what he needed from the warm, living pulse beating so close to him. But he fought it back with every ounce of his will. He would rather disintegrate into dust than harm her. "There's a specialty menu," Alara said, her back to him, her voice strained as she reorganized a stack of old linens to better hide the entrance. "For guests like you. The minibars in the suites are stocked. The thought of her venturing back into the lion's den for him sent a fresh wave of self-loathing through him. It's too dangerous. You've done enough. You'll be more dangerous if you're starving, she countered, a surprising amount of steel in her tone. She turned to face him, her expression determined. Stay here. Don't make a sound. Before he could protest further, she was gone, slipping out of the room as silently as she had entered. Left alone in the dark, Kalen was forced to confront the totality of his situation. He was a prince, stripped of his power, his guard, and his dignity, now hiding in a glorified broom closet. His life was in the hands of a human woman whose name he didn't even know. He leaned his head back against the cool concrete wall, the scent of her, honey and quiet strength, lingering in the air, a phantom comfort. He had spent his life surrounded by power, by those who wanted something from him. But she had offered him help when he had nothing to give but trouble. The realization was as profound and unsettling as the bond that now hummed between them. Elara returned 20 minutes later, her face pale but composed. She carried a plain black bag, from which she produced 2 chilled blood bags, the crimson liquid looking obscene in the dim light. She handed one to him without ceremony. His hands shook as he took it. The hunger was a raging beast inside him, and he tore into the bag with a desperate, guttural sound. He drained it in seconds, the life-giving fluid a balm on his frayed nerves and aching body. The edge of his hunger receded, and clarity began to return. He looked up to see her watching him, not with fear or disgust, but with a kind of solemn understanding. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice stronger now. "Elara." "Elara," he repeated, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. "I am in your debt." "Just get better," she replied, turning away to create a makeshift bed for him from a pile of old hotel blankets. "Your father's security will be here by dawn. The real lockdown is about to begin." As predicted, dawn brought a palpable shift in the hotel's atmosphere. The air grew tense, humming with the contained energy of apex predators. Elara felt it the moment she stepped out of the staff locker room, her fresh uniform a flimsy armor against the coming storm. The lobby was crawling with them, the king's enforcers. They were a different breed from the regular supernatural clientele. Dressed in sharp, dark suits that couldn't conceal their military bearing, they moved with a silent, coordinated deadliness. Their eyes missed nothing. Her heart pounded a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Every enforcer she passed felt like a potential executioner. She kept her own eyes downcast, her posture deferential, making herself smaller, less significant. She was just a maid, part of the furniture, unworthy of a second glance. It was a role she had played for years, but today, it felt like the most important performance of her life. The lead enforcer, a grim-faced vampire named Lyros with eyes like chips of obsidian, was personally overseeing the floor-by-floor search. He radiated an aura of ancient, implacable authority that made the air itself seem to thin around him. Elara's assignment, by some cruel twist of fate, was the royal floor. Her floor. She pushed her cart down the hallway, the silence broken only by the quiet murmur of enforcers speaking into wrist communicators. They were opening every room, their search methodical and thorough. She could feel Kalen's presence nearby, a faint thrum of energy through the bond that had snapped into place between them. He was there, just a few yards away, hidden behind a thin wall, and a legion of his father's most lethal hunters was closing in. Lyros and 2 other enforcers were standing directly outside the Royal Azura suite when she arrived. "The suite is clean," one of them reported. "No sign of forced entry. No trace of the prince." Lyros's cold gaze swept the hallway and landed on her. "You," he said, his voice a low command. "You prepped this suite yesterday." Elara's throat went dry. "Yes, sir." "Did you see anything? Hear anything? Anyone who wasn't supposed to be here?" His stare was physically painful, peeling back layers of her composure. "No, sir," she lied, her voice a mouse's squeak. She prayed he couldn't hear the frantic thunder of her heart. "The room was empty when I finished my shift. Everything was in order." He held her gaze for a moment longer, his eyes searching for any flicker of deceit. She poured every ounce of her life's experience of being helpless and terrified into her expression. She gave him exactly what he expected to see, a frightened little human, completely out of her depth. Finally, he gave a curt nod, dismissing her. "Check the service corridors on this level. All of them. I want every crawlspace and utility closet opened." The order was a death sentence. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She had to do something. She couldn't let them find that room. As the enforcers began to move down the hall, their destination, her secret hiding spot, a desperate, reckless idea sparked in her mind. It was insane. It was undignified. It was their only chance. She fumbled with a cleaning spray on her cart, her hands clumsy, and accidentally knocked a heavy glass bottle of concentrated disinfectant onto the marble floor. It shattered with a deafening crash. The enforcers spun around, their expressions annoyed. "My apologies," Elara cried, her voice high with manufactured panic. "I'm so sorry." As they watched, she bent down to clean up the mess, but instead, she surreptitiously pulled a small, concealed packet from her apron pocket, a potent chemical agent used for deep sanitation biocleans. It was strictly regulated. She ripped it open with her teeth and dumped the contents into the puddle of disinfectant. The chemical reaction was immediate and violent. A thick, acrid, gut-wrenchingly foul smoke began to billow from the spill, smelling like a combination of sulfur, ammonia, and rotting meat. It was utterly vile. "What is that stench?" one enforcer snarled, his hand flying to his nose. "Biohazard spill," Elara shrieked, playing her role to the hilt. "Contamination protocol. We have to evacuate the corridor." The smoke was thick and noxious. Even for vampires with their dulled sense of smell for anything but blood, the odor was overwhelming. Lyrose's face was a mask of pure disgust. The last thing he wanted was to deal with a messy human chemical disaster while hunting for a missing prince. "Seal the corridor," he commanded his men, his voice tight with irritation. "Get the hotel's hazmat team up here. We'll resume the search on this level once this filth is dealt with." He shot Elara a look of pure venom before turning and striding away, his team following close behind. Elara sagged against her cart, her body trembling with adrenaline. It had worked. She had bought them time. Through the thin wall, she felt a wave of fierce pride and profound relief wash over her from Kalen. He had witnessed the whole thing through their bond, her quick thinking, her insane bravery. He had seen the core of steel she hid beneath her quiet exterior. He knew, with sickening certainty, that he was falling in love with the human maid who had just saved him with a bottle of cleaning fluid and a lie. He also knew that this temporary reprieve was just that, temporary. Lyrose was not a man to be deterred for long. He had put her in the path of a juggernaut, and he had to get her out. He had to contact his father, and he had to do it now. When Elara finally slipped back into the utility room hours later, after the hazmat team, two disgruntled maintenance workers she was friends with, had cleared the mess, she found Kalen pacing the small space like a caged tiger. The blood she'd brought him had done its work. Color had returned to his face, and his wounds, though still severe, had begun to close. The potent healing of his lineage was reasserting itself. "That was the bravest, most reckless thing I have ever seen," he said, his voice a low thrum of awe and terror. He stopped in front of her, his presence filling the tiny room. "He could have killed you, Elara. He could have killed you," she countered, her chin lifting defiantly. "It worked, didn't it?" For now, he ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "Lyrose won't be put off for long. He's loyal to my father, but he's thorough. He will find this room eventually. I have to get a message to the king directly, one that bypasses my uncle's network of spies. He looked at her, his expression grim. I need your help. One last time. I swear it. What do you need me to do? She asked without hesitation. The choice to help had already been made, there was no turning back now. In the old city, near the docks, there is a small shop that deals in antique maps and charts. It's called the Navigator's Rest. The proprietor is an old man named Silas. He is a seer, and one of the few beings my father trusts implicitly. Kaelin reached inside his torn jacket and retrieved a small, heavy object from a hidden pocket. He pressed it into her hand. It was a signet ring, cold and heavy, bearing the crest of a snarling wolf's head. Show him this. He will know it comes from me. Tell him one word, Solstice. He will understand. He can reach my father through channels no one else can monitor. But you must go now, before they lock down the entire city. The weight of the ring in her palm felt like the weight of the world. Leaving the relative sanctuary of the hotel to venture into the city on a secret mission, for a fugitive prince, was a level of insanity she hadn't thought possible 24 hours ago. She could feel the eyes of the enforcers on her back even now. They'll be watching the staff, she murmured, her mind racing. I can't just walk out the front door. The laundry chutes, he said immediately. They lead to the sub-level processing center. From there, you can get to the delivery bays. They won't be monitoring service exits as closely as guest entrances. It was a plan born of desperation, but it was a plan nonetheless. She looked from the ring in her hand to his intense, silver gaze. The raw trust he was placing in her was a heavy, terrifying, and strangely wonderful burden. Be careful, Elara, he whispered, his voice laced with an emotion he couldn't name. He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a second before gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The brief touch was another jolt, a flash of heat that left her skin tingling. It was a promise, a plea, and a farewell, all in one. You too, she whispered back. Navigating the bowels of the hotel was like traversing a different world. She squeezed into the laundry chute, tumbling down 3 stories in a dizzying slide of linens and darkness, landing with a soft thud in a massive, empty bin. The air in the sublevel hummed with the thrum of industrial machinery. She crept through the labyrinthine corridors of the laundry facility, her heart in her throat, until she finally emerged into the chaos of the loading docks. The city outside was a shock to the senses. The air was thick with the smell of brine from the nearby harbor and the exhaust of 1,000 vehicles. She pulled the hood of her simple grey jacket over her head, melting into the anonymous lunchtime crowd. Every person who glanced her way seemed like a potential threat, a spy loyal to Kaelin's uncle. The paranoia was a cold knot in her stomach. The Navigator's Rest was exactly as Kaelin had described it, a narrow, dusty shop wedged between a raucous tavern and a fish market. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. The interior was dark and smelled of old paper, salt, and something faintly spicy, like cinnamon. An ancient, white-haired man with eyes the color of faded sea glass looked up from a massive, leather-bound book. "Can I help you, child?" His voice was like the rustle of dry leaves. Elara's hand trembled as she placed the signet ring on the counter. The old man's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He picked it up, his long, gnarled fingers tracing the wolf's head crest. "Solstice," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. Silas's gaze sharpened, his ancient eyes seeing far more than a nervous young woman. He saw the faint, shimmering aura of a royal bond clinging to her, a thread of silver and gold connecting her to the ring's owner. He nodded slowly, a deep understanding dawning on his face. "The message will be delivered," he said, his voice now imbued with a new gravity. "But you must be careful, child. You have stepped into a river that runs far deeper and faster than you know. There are forces at play that have waited centuries for this moment," he gestured for her to take the ring back. Go. Return to him. He will need you when the tide turns. The return journey was a blur of anxiety. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every siren a harbinger of discovery. When she finally slipped back into the utility room, Kalen was waiting, his entire body rigid with tension. The relief that washed over his face when he saw her was so profound it made her ache. It's done, she said, handing him the ring. He took it, his fingers closing over hers, his grip tight and grounding. Thank you, Elara. They stood like that for a long moment, the silence charged with unspoken emotions. The world outside, with its politics and assassins, faded away, leaving only the two of them in their small, dusty sanctuary. The wait was agonizing. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against Elara's nerves. Kalen was preternaturally still, conserving his energy, but she could feel the storm of his emotions through their bond, anxiety, hope, and a fierce, burning protectiveness directed entirely at her. They didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say. They had thrown their dice and could only wait to see how they landed. The change, when it came, was not a shout or a crash, but a sudden, absolute silence. The ambient hum of the hotel, the distant sounds of the city, the low murmur of the enforcers in the hall, it all just stopped. A blanket of profound silence descended, so heavy it felt like a physical pressure. Kalen was on his feet in an instant, pulling Elara behind him. He's here, he breathed, his voice tight. The door to their hiding place didn't open. It simply dissolved into dust, its molecules discorporating without a sound. Standing in the opening was a tall, imposing figure. He was older than Kalen, his black hair streaked with silver at the temples, his face a roadmap of centuries of command. He wore a simple, dark tunic, yet he radiated more power and authority than a legion of armored soldiers. It was King Theron. His eyes, the same piercing silver as his son's, swept the room, taking in the squalor, the makeshift bed, his wounded heir, and finally, the terrified human woman Kalen was shielding with his own body. Lyros and the other enforcers stood silently in the corridor behind him, their faces impassive, but Elara could feel their shock. Father, Kalen said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. There has been an attempt on my life. Your brother. I know, the king interrupted, his voice a low, resonant bass that vibrated in Elara's bones. He took a step into the room, his gaze never leaving her. Elara braced herself for the end. She expected rage, a cold dismissal, a swift and silent execution for the crime of touching, let alone hiding, his royal son. She was a complication, a contamination. Kalen shifted, placing himself more firmly between her and the king. She is under my protection. If you mean to harm her, you will have to go through me. The declaration, so bold and absolute, hung in the silent air. Elara's heart swelled with a fierce, painful emotion. He was willing to defy his own father, the king, for her. But Theron didn't even seem to register his son's defiance. His ancient, unreadable eyes remained fixed on Elara, a strange, contemplative light in their depths. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. Elara felt her entire life narrowing to this single point, this final judgment. Then, the king spoke, his words utterly unexpected, shattering all of Elara's preconceived notions of royal fury. So, King Theron said, his voice softer now, tinged with a weary, almost melancholic resonance. You are the one. The words made no sense. Elara stared at him, bewildered. Kalen looked equally stunned, his defensive posture faltering. The king took another step forward, his gaze sweeping over Elara not with condemnation, but with a deep, searching assessment, as if he were looking at a long-lost artifact. For generations, a prophecy has been a whisper in our bloodline, the king continued, his voice low, meant only for the three of them in that small, dusty room. It spoke of a time of great betrayal, when the heir would be brought low by his own kin, hunted by those sworn to protect him. The prophecy claimed his only sanctuary would be found with a mortal, a stranger to our world. A heart of stillness, it called her. One whose courage was born not of power, but of compassion. One who could shield a royal flame in the darkest of nights. He looked from Alara to his son. Your uncle knew of the prophecy. He has been searching for this heart of stillness for years, intending to destroy her before she could ever cross your path. The ambush was not just a grab for power, Kaelin. It was designed to flush you out, to force you into the open, wounded and alone, so he could prevent this from ever happening. The king's gaze returned to Alara, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than regal authority in his eyes. It was respect. He failed. He thought power could defeat prophecy. He did not account for a simple hotel maid with more honor than his entire cohort of assassins. A stunned silence filled the room. Alara felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. A prophecy. A heart of stillness. It sounded like a fairy tale, something utterly disconnected from her life of bleach and exhaustion. Yet, the king's words resonated with an undeniable truth, explaining the inexplicable pull she felt toward Kaelin, the impossible sense of safety she found in the presence of a predator. Kaelin stared at her, his silver eyes wide with dawning comprehension. He was seeing her fully for the first time, not just as a kind stranger or a fated mate, but as a figure of destiny, the linchpin in the survival of his line. The knowledge was overwhelming, humbling. King Theron then did the most unexpected thing of all. He inclined his head, a minuscule, but deeply significant gesture of acknowledgement, toward Alara. The prophecy affords you a choice, as is your right, he said, his tone formal. You have fulfilled your part. You may walk away from all of this. I will give you wealth beyond your imagination, a new life, and my personal guarantee of your absolute safety for the rest of your days. No one from our world will ever trouble you again. He paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. Or you can stay. You can claim the place that destiny has offered you. A place at my son's side. But know this, if you stay, the path ahead is not one of ease. It is a path of war. My brother has declared himself, and we will answer. Your life will never be simple or safe again. The choice was laid before her, stark and absolute. Safety and obscurity, or danger and destiny. She could feel Kaelin's desperate hope, a silent plea that pulsed between them, but he did not speak. He would not influence her. This had to be her decision, freely made. Alara looked from the ancient, powerful king to the wounded, hopeful prince. She thought of her life before this moment. A grey, muted existence of just getting by, of hiding from the ghosts of her past, of being invisible. She had been safe, but she hadn't been alive. Not really. In the last 24 hours, hiding a fugitive prince, defying enforcers, and sending secret messages, she had felt more fear than ever before. But she had also felt a fierce, burning purpose. She had felt, seen. Her fear was still there, a cold whisper in the back of her mind, but it was no longer the loudest voice. A new strength, one she never knew she possessed, rose to meet it. She was not the scared, helpless girl she had once been. She was a woman who had faced down a monster and offered him kindness. She was a woman who had outsmarted the king's most elite hunters. She realized with a jolt, the heart of stillness. She met the king's gaze, her own clear and unwavering. My life has never been simple or safe, Your Majesty. Then, she turned to Kaelin. His breath caught as she stepped away from the wall and moved toward him, closing the small distance between them. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers, strong and warm, curled around hers instantly, a perfect fit. The connection between them flared, no longer a confusing jolt, but a steady, brilliant current of light and warmth. I'm staying, she said, her voice quiet but firm, filled with a certainty that resonated in her very soul. She wasn't staying for a prophecy, or a title, or a kingdom. She was staying for him. For the broken man in the closet who had looked at her not as a servant, but as a savior. A slow, rare smile touched King Theron's lips. It transformed his harsh features, revealing a glimpse of the father beneath the monarch. He gave a single, sharp nod. The decision was made. The alliance was forged. He turned to the doorway, his regal authority returning like a mantle. Lyros, he commanded. Secure the hotel. Send word to the council. My brother has committed treason. The hunt is on. He paused, his final glance at his son and the human woman at his side filled with a grim pride. Bring my son home. As the king swept from the room, leaving a whirlwind of activity in his wake, Kaelin's gaze remained fixed on Alara. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle, reverent kiss to her knuckles. You have no idea what you've just done, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I think I do, she replied, a small, brave smile gracing her lips for the first time. I think I just started to live. The battle for the throne was about to begin, and the world would tremble. But here, in a dusty utility closet, a new foundation was being laid, not of power or politics, but of a courage she never knew she had, and a love he never thought he'd find. Together, they were a force prophecy had foretold, and their story was just beginning.